Inugami, evil dog spirit. Kosakai Fuboku. If I had Poe's literary talent, the story I am about to tell might be able to interest readers about 1/10 of his The Black Cat. Unfortunately, I have only ever worked as an office worker, and although I have enjoyed reading detective novels, I have never written anything like this, even at the age of 25. But now, I have taken up my pen in earnest. While waiting for the day of my execution in a dimly lit cell, I am writing with the intention of faithfully recording the circumstances that led me to commit the grave crime of murdering a woman. I am simply writing the facts as they are, without any intention of exaggerating or embellishing them. But readers may think that such a story is impossible. Also, the doctor who examined me said that my mental state may still be abnormal. But in any case, I am writing this paper with the desire to write what I believe to be true in my current mental state. The story I am about to tell you is actually quite similar to Poe's The Black Cat. In my story, a dog is the central character instead of a black cat, and the events are very similar. Therefore, readers may judge that my story is a false tale that imitates the black cat. However, I don't mind at all if people judge it that way. Not only do I not mind, but I would be happier if people said that my story is an imitation of the black cat. This is because my poor writing is far too shabby compared to the masters. I was born in a remote area of Iyo province. Readers are probably familiar with the legends of the Inugami dog god of Shikoku and the Hibigami snake god of Kyushu. But I was actually born into an Inugami family. There is a superstition that if a member of the Inugami family does not marry someone from an Inugami family, the family line will die out. And if a member of an Inugami family marries someone from a normal family, the couple will die an untimely death. Because of this superstition, my parents, I am ashamed to say, became husband and wife with a relationship that was even closer than that of cousins-a relationship of underscore and gave birth to me. I grew up as an only child and was selfish, staying at home after graduating from junior high school in a nearby town. If my parents had survived until now, I would have lived in the countryside as a farmer. However, last year, when the flu epidemic hit, both my parents died at the same time. And since then I had been content as a landowner, but I grew tired of the Inugami legend being attached to me in every way. So last spring I sold all the land and even the house I owned and moved to Tokyo to live in a free atmosphere. My family has only one heirloom that has been passed down for generations. It was a 5-foot-long frame with the 5 characters Konpira Okami written horizontally, and it seemed to be very old, as the paper was quite old. But the ink was so vivid that it seemed to float as one gazed upon it. My parents always used to say that no matter how badly our family was doing, this was the one thing we should never sell. So I never forgot to bring it with me when I moved to Tokyo. I stayed at a friend's house in Shiba Ward, and soon after, I rented a small house surrounded by a garden nearby, where I lived and cooked for myself, and decided to work for a certain company, thinking that it was a waste to just live there and have fun. I decided to display the Konpira Okami frame in the living room, but at the time, I never dreamed that this frame would later lead to my downfall. Soon after I started working at the company, nothing happened, but then, after I became familiar with the waitress at the cafe and we started living together, misfortune began to unfold in my life. When we were dating at the cafe, she was a quiet, good-natured woman, but when we were together, I felt a sense of disillusionment, and she did not give me enough satisfaction. But somehow I was drawn to her, and she also fell in love with me. Maybe the word fallen in love is not appropriate, but at the very least, her behavior towards me was extremely obvious. To give one example, when I came home from work, she would hang from my neck and do 20 to me, greedily. Before I knew it, a kind of heavy feeling that I cannot describe began to grow in my heart. One day, a friend of mine, a medical student, saw my face and teased me, saying, "You have an excessively 20 face." At the same time, he also casually said that people who are excessively 20 tend to be superstitious, just like prostitutes. However, the fact that he said this so casually struck a chord with me was because, although I don't know whether there is a medical theory that says that excessively 20 makes people superstitious, at the time my heart was somehow beginning to become dark, and the superstition surrounding the Inugami legend that had been passed down in my family was threatening to take over my mind. In other words, I had a kind of obsession that if anyone from the Inugami family married a woman born into a normal family, they would die in a strange way, and this idea grew stronger with each passing day. I was not legally married to her. I wanted to register our marriage, but she wouldn't even tell me where she was born. She didn't seem to have any parents or siblings, and she never wrote me a letter, nor did anyone ever visit her. I didn't even know if her name, Harutsuyuki, was her real name. She didn't tell me her age, let alone her age, and since it wouldn't have made any difference if I had, I left it at that. Judging from the way she spoke, she didn't seem to be from Shikoku or Kyushu, but rather from the Tohoku region. But I didn't feel like investigating her background. Even though we weren't legally married, we were practically husband and wife. So my obsession never went away, and I felt like I was about to encounter something terrible. One day, On my way home from work, I was taking a walk in Shiba Park when out of nowhere a white dog came running up to me with a frightened look on its face, and in a flash it bit me through my trousers. Before I knew it, the dog had run off into the distance, and at the same time, I felt a burning pain in my right thigh. Mad dog. At that moment, rather than the fear of the mad dog's poison, I was terrified by the idea of a dog's curse, that is, the gateway to ruin. I stood there in a daze for a while, but then I pulled myself together, took a handkerchief from my pocket, bandaged the wound, and limped home. When I opened the lattice door and climbed up, she jumped out as usual and tried to cling to me. But as soon as she saw that my face looked unusual and that my cramps were swollen, she suddenly dropped to her knees and, before I could say anything, removed the handkerchief bandage and stared at the bloody wound for about a minute. Then suddenly she put her right hand on my right thigh and, like a dog biting, put her lips to the wound and began to suckle like a baby sucking its mother's breast. Shocked, I instinctively tried to pull my shins back, but her strong arms prevented me from even twitching my legs. I was so scared that I was stunned for a while, and then she sucked my blood for about 3 minutes, swallowed it comfortably, and then she smiled, showing her blood-stained gums, and said, "You were bitten by a rabid dog, weren't you? I sucked out all the poison, so you don't need to get a preventive shot anymore." That night, she sucked my blood 4 or 5 times. However, I was still anxious, so I decided to take the next day off work and go to the Infectious Disease Research Center every day to get a preventive shot. She didn't seem very happy when she found out that I was getting an injection, but she didn't resist strongly. However, after hearing that I had received an injection, she stopped sucking blood from my wound and just licked my body playfully, as usual. Even as I was getting the injection, I somehow felt that my heart was gradually becoming more and more agitated. Perhaps the poison of the rabid dog was starting to spread throughout my body. Perhaps the venom of the dog that bit me was so strong that the vaccination was ineffective. Thinking this, one day I mentioned it to the doctor who gave me the vaccination, and he comforted me by saying that no one who had received the vaccination at this institute had ever contracted hydrophobia. That's right. Hydrophobia. As long as the sight of water doesn't make me feel frightened, I don't have the disease. I have a habit of stopping to look at the surface of the water every time I pass over Shibazono Bridge, and I have never felt frightened, so I don't have rabies. I felt relieved for a moment, but the thoughts of it's the curse of the dog god, and this is a terrible step towards my ruin, did not disappear, but rather grew stronger. I ended up quitting my job. However, lately I've been feeling somehow uncomfortable being with her day and night, so I went to get my injection in the morning and went for a walk in the afternoon, but she didn't want to come with me. One night, after having dinner at a certain restaurant in Nihonbashi, I was in a good mood, so I decided to surprise her. I quietly opened the lattice door and went inside the house. I came to the living room on tiptoes, and just as I was about to scare her, I was frozen in place as if I had been doused in ice. She had just stuck her head in the brazier, like a dog would, and was licking the ashes. I was so scared that I turned around and tried to run away. But at that moment she raised her head, looked at me, and wiped her mouth with a handkerchief without any sign of surprise. "Oh, when did you come back? I can't help but want to eat ashes and mud these days. I'm pregnant." Hearing this, I was struck by something. Indeed, when one is pregnant, they develop strange tastes and crave things that they normally wouldn't. So, perhaps her willingness to suck my blood the other day was also due to her pregnancy. However, this relief was only momentary, and the next moment, an even more terrifying feeling filled my heart. If she was really pregnant, then that would be indisputable proof of our marriage. And wouldn't that mean that the dark hand of fate had wrapped itself around us with yet another curtain? Thinking this, I suddenly looked at the lintel and saw the words Konpira no Okami written there in vivid letters, as if they had emerged from the dim light around them. My heart became even darker. Could it really be true that she was pregnant? Could she, like me, be cursed by the Inugami? Licking the blood and licking the ashes could be said to be the curse of the dog god. I felt like I couldn't take it anymore. I was so irritated that I thought I might as well just bite her to death and then die myself. The next day, while receiving my last vaccination, I decided to ask the doctor, "Doctor, I've just had this injection and today is almost over, but I feel like my heart is getting heavier and my mood is getting worse. Could you please take a sample of my blood and examine it? What would you like to examine by taking a blood sample?" "I'm thinking that maybe I have dog blood circulating in my body." "That's ridiculous." "No, I'm serious. Please examine it." The doctor seemed to think I was joking at first, but when he saw the truth on my face, he said, "Very well. I'll examine it. If the blood of a person bitten by a rabid dog takes on the same properties as dog blood, that would be a major discovery for the academic world, and took about 2 grams of blood from a vein in my arm into a test tube." Impatient for the next day, I visited the laboratory. As soon as the doctor saw me, he turned extremely serious and said, "You've come. I've finally made a major discovery. Come over here first." I left the doctor, stunned, without listening to the rest of the staff, and ran out. It was all over. There was no doubt that dog blood was running through my veins. This was now scientifically proven. There was no way to know if everything in the Inugami household had dog blood running through it, or if I had been bitten by a rabid dog and my blood had turned to dog blood. But there was dog blood running through my body. Just thinking this would be enough to make most people go mad. Now, with my mind somewhat calmed down, I think that the doctor may have meant something different when he said he had made a major discovery. But why would I have had the urge to enter that laboratory and see how my blood reacted at the time? From that moment on, I wanted with all my heart to somehow purify my tainted blood back into human blood. But as I'm not a doctor, what could I do to help? The only solution I could find was to increase my alcohol intake. I drank heavily. Whether I was at home or out, I was constantly drinking. At first, when I drank a lot of alcohol, my anxieties were miraculously swept away, and at the same time, I felt as if my blood was being purified. However, as the days passed, the alcohol no longer had its full effect, and when the alcohol no longer had any effect, and I realized that there was no longer any way to purify my blood, it seemed as if my blood was becoming polluted at twice the rate than before. She continued to lick ashes and eat mud. Recently, she has taken an even greater interest in eating mud covered in fishy juice. It must be the curse of a dog, not a pregnancy. No, she herself is a dog. She was a dog sent from the demon world to destroy me. Thinking this, I gradually became afraid to even go near her, and later I even began to curse her existence. She continued to shut herself up in the living room, needlework beside the brazier, beneath the plaque of Konpira Okami. One night, I drank too much and came home feeling unusually drunk that night. She was making something out of a piece of white cloth, and when I approached her, she quickly hid it behind her back. "What's that?" I said, jumping at her and snatching it from her hand, then dropped it without thinking at first glance. It was a toy dog. I was startled. "Why did you make something like this?" "I've recently become fond of dog toys. It's not surprising, I was born in the year of the dog." "Oh, why do you look so scary?" As she said this, she clung to me as usual to appease me, and licked my cheek. At that moment, I was more frightened than ever. That's because her tongue was rough like a dog's. Perhaps her tongue was rough because she had just been eating mud, but at that moment I no longer had time to think about such things, and was simply filled with the thought that she was a dog. When I pulled her away with all my strength, she grinned, and at that moment the corners of her mouth stretched forward by about 3 inches, making her mouth look just like a dog's. As soon as I grabbed the sewing iron that was stuck into the brazier, I brought it down on her forehead with all my strength. At that moment, something that looked like blood seemed to spurt out, but strangely, no blood flowed out. Instead, she fell onto her back without saying a word, and for the first time, dark blood began to flow onto the tatami mat from the wound on her forehead. I suddenly came to my senses and looked closely, and her face was her usual face. It was nothing other than the face of a dead person. While I regretted my rash actions, strangely, a feeling similar to relief rose up inside me, and at the same time, it seemed as if my reason had begun to work a little. I carried her body into the bathtub and put the lid on, then returned to the living room/drawing room, and to my surprise, the pool of blood from her forehead had formed the shape of a barking dog, as if someone had purposely painted it on the tatami mat with red paint. Seeing this, I felt a cold sweat drip from my entire body. I quickly filled a bucket with water and first wiped the cursed dog's form, then looked around, but surprisingly, apart from the pool of blood, there was not a single blood spatter, and I could not find anything that looked like bloodstains on the tatami mats, shoji screens, or sliding doors. Then, over the course of 3 days, I dismembered her body and burned it in the stove in the bathroom. At night, dogs would gather from nowhere and bark frequently, but fortunately no one noticed until I had disposed of the body. I even raked up the ashes from the stove and scattered them all over the field behind the house, and wiped the tatami mats and bathtub over and over again, thinking that now it would be okay if anyone came to investigate. Sure enough, on the morning of the 4th day, 3 detectives came, showed a warrant, and asked to search the house. They had probably heard rumors from neighbors who had become suspicious of my barking dog and had come to investigate. I welcomed them with a calm demeanor that impressed me, and told them that the woman I was living with had gone out the other day and had not returned. Seeing this, I felt a cold sweat pouring down my entire body. I quickly filled a bucket with water and first wiped away the accursed dog's remains, then looked around, but surprisingly, apart from the pool of blood, there was not a single blood splatter, and I could not find anything that looked like bloodstains on the tatami mats, shoji screens, or sliding doors. Then, over the course of 3 days, I dismembered her body and burned it in the stove in the bathroom. At night, dogs would gather from out of nowhere and bark frequently, but luckily no one noticed until I had disposed of the body. I even raked up the ashes from the stove and scattered them all in the field behind the house, and mopped the tatami mats and bathtub many times, thinking that it would be fine if anyone came to question me. Sure enough, on the morning of the fourth day, 3 detectives came and showed me a warrant, asking if they could search the house. They had probably heard the dog barking and had come to investigate, having heard rumors from the neighbors who were suspicious. I welcomed the 3 with a calm demeanor that impressed me, and told them that the woman who lived with me had gone out the other day and had not returned. Not expecting to question me at all, the detectives suddenly went to examine the ashes in the stove in the bathroom, but there was no way they were going to find any evidence in the first place. So the 3 of them grinned and whispered to one another as they brought out a large mirror and examined the tatami mats in the living room, but once again their efforts were in vain. Suddenly, I felt something pressing on my chest. I felt a slight nausea, so I looked away from them and sat in front of the brazier, idly raking the ashes. Suddenly, I noticed that the voices of the 3 people who had been mumbling to each other could no longer be heard, and the surroundings had become eerily quiet. So I looked up to see what had happened, and saw that the 3 were standing directly below a plaque with the words Konpira Okami written on it, staring at a single point on the forehead as if they were watching an airplane doing a somersault. I also stood up and moved closer to the 3 of them, gazing at the letters on the forehead. Oh, the shock I felt at that moment. I felt as if every nerve in my body had been pulled out. The character Dai in Konpira Okami had mysteriously changed to the character Inu Dog, and that made the character Dai look like a dog was unmistakably a dark blood stain. Now that I think about it, the moment I brought the iron down on her forehead, I accidentally missed the single drop of blood that splattered and landed next to her spread-eagled face. I groaned loudly and passed out on the spot.